First up, powerful satire from Rory Bremner, who finds himself stuck between Iraq and a hard place.
And then, in a scene unprecedented in British political history, Tony Blair left Downing Street and joined the peace protesters in Trafalgar Square. Appearing moments later on stage alongside pop singer Miss Dynamite to deliver what many are calling the most sensational speech in living memory.
None of us here wishes to see the barbarism of Saddam go unchecked or unpunished. But I have to say to you, to ignore the will of the United Nations, to turn our face against our partners in Europe, is a price I'm not prepared to pay. Let us seek to bring peace to the Middle East. Let us work to end the conditions of poverty and injustice which the terrorists exploit as their cause. And to do that, will you please welcome back the one and only Dido.
What the hell's going on?
Looks like he's going all European on us, sir.
Doesn't he understand in this war you're either for us or against us?
I think his people are pretty steamed up. He's got hundreds of thousands on the streets, sir.
Don't mean you have to listen to them. That's the whole point about being leader in a democracy, Condi. Once you're elected, you make the decisions, not them.
So what's your decision, sir?
Huh?
What are you gonna do now, sir?
Well, you tell me, Condi. I want you to get Wolfie and Rummy and Secretary of State and the Vice President, and you tell me what to do. That's what you're paid for.
God.
Yeah, him too. If it weren't for him, I don't know what I'd do.
Bloody hell, what was that all about, eh? Tony the Peacemaker?
Yeah, well, those people out there, they got a point.
Oh, thanks, mate. You're telling me that all that hard work I've done, all that stuff on the dossier, you're telling me it's all for nothing?
Look, come on, Alistair, you know full well you could have taken all that information and spun it the other way around. That's what you're good at. All the stuff on WMD, it's all ifs and buts. Yeah, we need certainty. Besides, we could have lost the vote.
Oh, don't tell me that you're frightened of Claire Short and Glenda Jackson, Peter Guilfoyle, Frank Dobson.
Sometimes, Alistair, in life, you end up doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. Huh? Better that than the other way round. Besides, it's not just them.
Been talking to that wife of yours?
There's more to life than politics, Alistair. As Cherie says, if we don't get this one right, she'll never be able to show her face in Sharm el-Sheikh again. On May the 1st, 2003, George Bush declared that major hostilities in Iraq were over.
My fellow Americans, major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
Unfortunately, no one told the Iraqis.
The Middle East, and Baghdad in particular, has long been the setting for exotic tales of wealth, power, and intrigue. Our imagination captured by stories of rivalry, treachery, deceit, and conspiracy, played out against the colourful backdrop of the Persian Empire. For centuries, plots and adventures set in the palaces of Baghdad and Basra have been the stuff of fiction. But the modern-day American occupation of Iraq and the aftermath of Operation Iraqi Freedom surpassed even the wildest imagination, with their heady tales of bloodshed, intrigue, corruption, and avarice.
This program is not about the invasion, but about what happened afterwards. The consequences of what the Pentagon Defense Science Board described as near total confusion over objectives and strategies. It's the story of what happened and what didn't happen.
Mr. President, Secretary Powell's presentation today was neither full, nor accurate, nor complete. And by anyone's definition, it was a false statement. Its central premise, that Iraq possesses weapons of mass destruction, is a lie. And today's briefing by Secretary Powell was long on repetition, but short on fact. The United Kingdom does not want war. What we want is for the United Nations system to be upheld.
But whilst Jack Straw's performance may have earned plaudits from many, one delegation certainly wasn't impressed.
Everything we have seen and heard indicates that the United Kingdom were doing all they possibly can, not to support, but to frustrate us.
Nevertheless, here at the UN, there is a real belief that by Britain's actions, war may have been averted. And for that, the credit must go to Tony Blair, whose brave diplomacy has seen Britain's relationship with both the UN and our European allies back on a firm footing.
The reconstruction of Iraq was the largest American-led program since the Marshall Plan to rebuild war-torn Western Europe 60 years earlier. But there was a difference. Whereas the Marshall Plan was funded by the US government, the Iraqi reconstruction was to be paid for by the Iraqis themselves. And there was certainly plenty to rebuild. The damage left from 2 wars, 13 years of sanctions, and an orgy of looting and destruction by the Iraqis themselves, who gutted hospitals, power stations, schools and government buildings. Not that this worried Donald Rumsfeld.
Stuff happens. But in terms of what's going on in that country, it is a fundamental misunderstanding to see those images over and over and over again of some boy walking out with a vase and say, oh my goodness, you didn't have a plan. That's nonsense. They know what they're doing, and they're doing a terrific job. And it's untidy, and freedom's untidy, and free people are free to make mistakes and commit crimes and do bad things. They're also free to live their lives and do wonderful things. And that's what's going to happen here.
As the looting went on, American troops stood idly by. For today's destruction was tomorrow's reconstruction opportunity. At Rebuilding Iraq conferences, potential contractors were told that the country was the newest, most lucrative and fastest growing market.
Still, at least the Iraqis could pay for it. According to Paul Wolfowitz, number 2 at the Pentagon,
there's a lot of money to pay for this. On a rough recollection, the oil revenues of that country could bring between $50 and $100 billion over the next 2 or 3 years.
Note the sophisticated estimate of the figures, a leeway of roughly $50 billion. Such an eye for figures obviously caught George Bush's attention. Last year, he made Wolfowitz head of the World Bank. The plan, as crude as the oil it depended on, was to build a new Iraq to American specification and use the Iraqis' money to pay for it. To get things rolling, the Development Fund for Iraq was set up, with money from a variety of Iraqi sources. $6 billion left over from the UN Oil for Food program, $4 billion from Saddam's assets that were sequestered and frozen in international banks, and $10 billion from resumed oil exports for just the first year after the invasion, giving a total of $20 billion. The money was put into the Iraqis' account at the Federal Reserve in New York, as stipulated by UN Security Council Resolution 1483.
The money to be spent in a transparent manner benefiting the people of Iraq.
So what happened to it? In May 2003, the occupying powers, led by the United States, had a choice: to let the Iraqis make a mess of things, or to do the job for them. Within weeks, the Office of Reconstruction and Humanitarian Assistance made way for the American-led Coalition Provisional Authority, headed by Paul Bremner, a former counterterrorism expert at the State Department, and more importantly, a close friend of Donald Rumsfeld.
We are spending $19 billion on Iraq's reconstruction over the next 12 to 15 months.
On arrival in Baghdad, Bremner set up office in the vast marble hall of Saddam's grandest palace. Well, there's no accounting for taste. And as it happened, there was no taste for accounting. By the time Bremner left Iraq 13 months later, so had any chance of keeping track of the Iraqis' $20 billion. Under American management, the Development Fund for Iraq became the biggest cash point machine in history. 363 tons of $100 bills were shipped to Baghdad on American C-130 aircraft. It didn't stay there for long. In one episode on the 12th of April 2004, 3 Black Hawk helicopters, hired by the Coalition Authority, flew to Erbil in northern Iraq to deliver over $1.5 billion in cash to a local courier. The main problem, though, apart from the weight nearly bringing the choppers down, was that Bremner's people hadn't checked out the courier. Meanwhile, at the authorities' headquarters in Baghdad, cash was stuffed into plastic bags, then delivered around the capital in pickup trucks. A slush fund of $600 million in cash was kept in Bremner's office. The GI responsible for some $200 million kept the key to the safe in his bike bag, which he left on his desk during his lunch breaks. Just as Iraq's cash flowed unmetered from Bremner's office, so the country's oil flowed unmetered out of the country. While the official figure for oil exports was $10 billion a year, it's estimated a further $4 billion worth may have been illegally siphoned off for the black market. So where did all the money go? Who knows? The coalition authority handed over $9 billion to the Iraqi ministries. Of this money, a staggering $8.8 billion, 98%, was unaccounted for. How was this possible? Well, Bremner was a stickler for security. The 10-foot-high concrete defences around his headquarters in the so-called Green Zone are called Bremner Walls, in tribute to his hard man image. But as well as keeping out the car bombers, these also, it seems, protected the authority against accountants. The UN Security Council had agreed the Americans could run Iraq on condition that an independent international monitoring board would be able to audit Bremner's spending. It took 6 months of negotiation to set it up, and a further 6 months to find a firm of accountants acceptable to the Americans. When they eventually arrived in Iraq, the auditors were treated like insurgents, having trouble getting into the administration's offices in the Green Zone. They were told by Bremner's staff that cooperation is given a low priority. So what did happen to the money? Well, pilfering was rife. Millions of dollars simply went missing from the Iraqi central bank. In one region of Iraq, documentation wasn't available for 2/3 of a sample of 300 contracts. Files did not contain evidence that goods and services had been received, invoices had been submitted, or payments made. In the South Central District, all but $300,000 of a $20.9 million grant package was unaccounted for. And what did this money underwrite?
Opening a regional democracy center. Translating books that define Western civilization. Cleaning up village and installing civic pride.
Who said the Americans had no sense of irony? Shortly after Paul Bremner quit Iraq, the CPA issued a glossy report on its achievements.
At the core of this new Iraq is the development of a democratic, accountable, and self-governing civil society, respectful of human rights and freedom of expression.
The American auditors described it differently. Having inspected the authorities' files, they opened 69 criminal investigations into theft, fraud, waste, assault, and extortion. Since then, there have been dozens more. But while Bremner oversaw the disposal of nearly all the Iraqis' money by the time he left, American Congress had also voted some $18 billion of American funds for reconstruction. Aware that this was taxpayers' money and more closely scrutinized, Bremner took a prudent line here and spent little more than 2% of it, $400 million, before he left.
Welcome, little prince.
Just as Bremner spent the Iraqis' cash before leaving, so the new Iraqi authority, established in June 2004, returned the compliment and set about spending the Americans' money.
Father of a beard, there's some mistake. I'm not a prince. I'm only a thief.
Yeah, I was just wondering, what was it made you change your mind?
Well, you know how we set a lot of store by the Joint Intelligence Committee?
The spooks, yeah.
Well, something they said last month really freaked me. They said the greatest terrorist threat to Western interests comes from Al-Qaeda, right?
Right.
And they said that threat would be heightened by military action in Iraq.
So, by invading, we could have ended up provoking the very thing we want to avoid.
Exactly. I mean, can you imagine if someone decided to bomb London, for instance, because we invaded Iraq? What would I do then?
You'd get out of it. You always do.
As the inspectors continue, it has become clear that Saddam's much-vaunted WMD program was all but a sham. And with a central plank of his authority removed, His regime looks weakened tonight. Sources predict the dictator may even have to allow human rights inspectors into the country, and hopes for a new constitution are gaining credibility.
See, way I see it, going ahead with the invasion is the only way to guarantee peace.
In the Gulf states, sir.
No, peace from folks like Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz and Cheney and Pearl, chewing my ear off all day long about the need to bring democracy to the folks in Iraq.
It's a noble aim, sir.
Oh, sure. It would sure be payback for those folks that knocked down the Twin Towers. Do we manage to link that to Saddam?
Not yet, sir, but we're working on it.
And it'd be a great way to make our mark on history. Can you think of something else?
Well, folks always like a good space story. Hey, how about a moonshot, sir?
Are you crazy? Is there any oil there?
If there were, we'd never get it home.
I rest my case.
Sir, how about Africa, full of dictators and corruption and poverty and genocide?
Any oil?
I have work to do.
That we know as much as we do know about how American companies have profited in Iraq is largely down to this man.
I have instructed every member of my staff to fully cooperate in this investigation.
No, not George Bush, but Henry Waxman.
If our national security has been jeopardized, it's been jeopardized for political purposes.
A Democrat and minority member of the House of Representatives Committee on Government Reform. At his request, Congress's financial investigators, the Government Accountability Office, or GAO, investigated contracts with several American firms, not least Halliburton, whose head office is in Houston, Texas, George Bush's old stomping ground. Under the snappily named Logistics Civil Augmentation Program, or LOGCAP, designed to facilitate a slimline invasion force, Halliburton and its subsidiary, Kellogg Brown and Root, provided virtually all backup facilities, from meals to laundry soap to the American forces. The contracts are priced on a cost-plus basis. Whatever the company spends, it gets back, plus a percentage on top. The more it spends, the bigger the profit. It's a license to print money. Halliburton's contract with the US Army Corps of Engineering alone is estimated to be worth $10 billion. And it earned a glowing mention from a Pentagon contracting officer, who described it as
the most blatant and improper contracting abuse I had ever witnessed.
But it would be wrong to judge the company on one contract alone, when there are so many others to choose from. In the first 9 months of the occupation, KBR billed for 3 million meals that American troops in Iraq never had. The company sent the 101st Airborne Division motorhomes, and then charged it twice what it would cost to build a new barracks. KBR also handled American military transport. First, it bought fleets of brand new Mercedes-Benz trucks, costing $85,000 each. Then sent them traveling up and down Iraq's central highways, accompanied by armed military escorts. If there were no goods to transport, no problem. KBR dispatched empty lorries anyway, and billed accordingly. For fear of ambush, KBR drivers were told not to slow down. Quote,
"The truck in front of the one I was riding ran a car with an Iraqi family of 4 off the road,"
a KBR employee told Waxman's committee.
"My driver said that was normal."
Halliburton and its subsidiaries had a free hand for the first 9 months of occupation, being handed contracts with no rival bids on the strength of their track record. Dick Cheney was Halliburton's chairman before he became George Bush's vice president. As George Bush says, he's a fine businessman and public servant. Halliburton and KBR deny allegations of impropriety in Iraq. It's just a bit surprising that such a big, Houston-based company with thousands of highly skilled employees, all good, hard-working, patriotic folk, using the most modern computers, don't keep decent accounts.
So, Mr. Cheney, may I call you Dick?
I don't think so.
How do you explain these anomalies?
Well, look, John, you can spend the money on accountants, or you can spend it on engineers. You tell me which is more likely to get the country on its feet.
Well, how can you justify such profiteering by Halliburton?
Look, I don't work for the company anymore. All I see is the share price going up, and that has to be a good thing.
Has to be?
Well, there has to be some good coming out of all this. We're in the business of helping people rebuild their lives. If some of those folks work for Halliburton, so much the better.
But isn't it a scandal that we have absolutely no idea how much money is unaccounted for?
No, not at all. I happen to think it'd be a whole lot more of a scandal if we did know.
Back in Baghdad, the man leading Iraq's anti-corruption commission is none other than Pentagon favourite Ahmed Shalaby, no stranger to corruption himself, having been tried and sentenced to 22 years hard labour in Jordan for alleged fraud. Tackling corruption is a dangerous business in Iraq. 2 previous investigators were murdered. Now, a bit of corruption, or loose accounting, is to be expected with a big task like rebuilding an entire country, especially one you've destroyed. The problem is, almost 3 years after defeating Saddam, the destruction goes on. As the American Army Contracting Commander pointed out to the auditors,
the peaceful conditions envisioned in the early planning continue to elude the reconstruction efforts.
Abu! Basra! Basra. How beautiful it looks.
What the contractors repair, the insurgents blow up. While the American Marines flatten entire neighbourhoods, which have to be repaired and rebuilt once more. All of which means that money meant for development and reconstruction is diverted instead into emergency repairs and the massive security effort.
Oil exports from Iraq last May averaged 1.4 million barrels a day, 1 million barrels a day fewer than under Saddam, and half what it was 30 years ago, despite a huge increase in global demand. The consequence of increased security spending was the shelving of long-term infrastructure projects. As the proportion of the budget spent on the military rose from 23 to 34%, so the amount spent on clean water schemes dropped from 23 to just 12%, punishing those in greatest need.
Electricians employed on maintenance contracts are considered a high-risk terrorist target. As a result, they have to be flown everywhere in armed Black Hawk helicopters. On site, they're advised to remain no longer than 30 minutes, and above all, never to announce visits beforehand. So imagine you have a burst pipe and need a plumber. You ring, he's free, but won't give you an appointment time. Instead turns up several days later, out of the blue, in a helicopter. He steps out, says hello, takes a look around, decides you need a new washer, but before he can get his toolbox out, he's blurted out a hurried goodbye and dashed off, leaving you with a bill for $19,000 and a follow-up appointment for some time whenever. And you want to run a country like this? 6 months into the occupation, the Americans had hoped to transfer security to the Iraqis. Unfortunately, as the auditors discovered, most of the new recruits were neither vetted nor properly trained, while in many cases the police and army had been infiltrated by former Ba'athist loyalists and other insurgents. Iraqi police manning a checkpoint in one area were reporting convoy movements by mobile telephone to local terrorists. In desperation, the authorities turned to private military companies. By the end of 2005, the combined total of mercenaries, coalition forces, and Iraqi security personnel in Iraq had risen to 399,000, greater than the number employed under Saddam, a regime that the Americans described as
grotesquely over-militarized.
Britain still doesn't regulate private military personnel, while in Iraq, a final decree issued by Bremner exempted coalition and private soldiers from prosecution.
There are now believed to be over 30,000 private military personnel in Iraq, many former professional soldiers recruited from the British Army, including ex-SAS officers, lured by the prospect of up to £30,000 a month working for private security firms. International security is one of the world's fastest growing industries, worth over $100 billion every year. The regular army discourages recruits to the private sector by warning of the lack of pension rights and the deadly risks of life as a mercenary. This footage of mercenaries operating in Iraq was shot from the back of a jeep, as it seems was anybody unlucky enough to get within range. It was then proudly displayed on their website.
Coming down the line. Rain, rain. Coming down the line. Well, it's bringing my baby. Oh, she's my, oh, my, she's
Added to the corruption and security problems was the age-old problem of incompetence. In 2004, the coalition authority decided to re-equip Iraqi power plants with gas turbine generators. The contract went to American company Bechtel. The only trouble being that when the gleaming new gas turbines started sprouting up all over the country, someone pointed out that Iraq didn't have any real history of natural gas production. As a result, the turbines had to be converted to run on low-grade oil, halving efficiency and making them 3 times harder to maintain. The Iraqis can't sue the contractors. Bremner's decree of immunity from prosecution applies to them too.
Among those being knighted at the palace was the government scientist and former UN weapons inspector, Dr. David Kelly. His work in Iraq now recognized as vital in undermining Saddam's regime and exposing his weakness. In Iraq itself, international pressure continues to produce more encouraging results, with speculation that Saddam may even be prepared to introduce a Bill of Rights and pave the way for elections in return for Western cooperation.
Under the interim Prime Minister Ayad Alawi, a draft constitution was drawn up, promising Iraqis full rights to free healthcare and education, and enshrining that all natural resources, that is oil, should be owned by the people.
We will be doing our best to regain our capabilities and providing the essential services to the Iraqi people.
Oh yes, oil. We'd almost forgotten. Dick Cheney hadn't.
The Vice President of the United States, Dick Cheney.
While many regions of the world offer great oil opportunities, the Middle East, with 2/3 of the world's oil and the lowest cost, is still where the prize ultimately lies. Iraq has the world's second largest oil reserves, much of it in shallow, easy-to-reach beds. With an eye on this, plans to exploit the country's oil reserves to pay for Iraq's transformation were already under discussion long before 9/11.
The United States, since Desert Storm, has always had a various planning with respect to Iraq.
When, in the immediate aftermath of the Twin Towers attack, Condoleezza Rice asked policymakers to think, quote,
how to capitalize on these opportunities.
It wasn't simply altruism she had in mind. The neoconservatives who were running the White House had long been itching for the chance to smash OPEC's cartel through increasing Iraqi oil production, thereby liberating America's hard-pressed SUV drivers from the tyranny of foreign oil barons. And 9/11 was an open invitation. But America's intentions had to be at least seen to be honorable, and Iraq's Supreme Council for Oil Policy duly confirmed that the country's oil fields would very definitely remain in the control of the Iraq National Oil Company. But, and here's the thing, this applied only to existing reserves. Those yet to be surveyed, and suggestions are that these dwarf those currently known, would most definitely be up for grabs. See, I hear a lot of folks say Iraqi oil belongs to Iraqis, but, you know, if you study a little history, you find that way back in 1927, up in Mosul, a deal was done which divided the oil rights between companies from Britain, France, Holland, and the United States. So the way I see it, they had nothing then. So they're ahead.
And this is my curse. You shall remain a dog, and you shall walk in the darkness of the blind.
Mind you, we're being a little unfair going on about oil. There were other equally rich pickings. In June 2004, Bremner drew up a number of orders which would go into the transitional administrative law. The most infamous of these was Order Number 39, which decreed that virtually all Iraqi state companies could be privatized. Meanwhile, Order 81 covered
patent industrial design, undisclosed information, integrated circuits, and plant variety.
This overturned the Iraqis' centuries-old rights over their seeds, trees and vines, and offered these precious resources to foreign ownership.
This is a place of desolation.
It is the most beautiful garden in the world.
If there were ever flowers in it, they'd vanish like camphor, and the pool should dark with weed. You can't even see your own reflection in it.
I'm not looking for my own reflection.
Incidentally, this also opened the door for such endeavours as stem cell research, immoral in the US, less scrutinised abroad.
There.
Still, oil and privatisation apart, the Constitution was all the Iraqis' own work. Well, nearly. The first draft of the Constitution also had a firm line on the armed forces. Quote,
"The erection of foreign military bases in Iraq is forbidden. In case of emergency, the Parliament, by a two-thirds majority of its members, may deviate from this article."
A few phone calls later, and those words had magically vanished. Still, the odd change or three apart, by 2005, the Iraqi Parliament had a constitution. Not that it was easy getting there. For the first 4 months of the year, the parliamentarians had seriously, carefully and assiduously gone on holiday. A move by those who remained to pass a law sacking absentee MPs failed because not enough members turned up to the vote. In the end, the final draft of the Constitution was only completed in August, 4 days before the referendum was held to vote on it. The text itself wasn't available in printed form until after the vote had been held. So what did people vote for in blind faith? The Constitution, largely drafted by a Shia cleric from the benign-sounding Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq, gave autonomy and oil rights to the Kurdish north, where the oil was, and the Shiite south, where the rest of the oil was. The Sunnis in the middle were left to live on the profits from their date trees. Meanwhile, a new Supreme Court would be set up. Its judges could veto any laws passed which ran contrary to Islamic law. In the traditionally Shiite south, women would not be free to wear what they chose and received no legal protection. Behind the velvet glove of the new constitution lies the iron fist of the Badr Brigades, the militia of the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq. There have been reports of the brigades intimidating women and even death squads. Iraqis wonder how the Americans removed the Taliban from Afghanistan, only for it to return in Iraq.
Another execution. Why had he to die?
He had been thinking, my lord and master.
Is it a crime, then, to think?
In a subject, it's quite unpardonable.
Are men only to be ruled by fear?
Men are evil. Hatred behind their eyes, lies on their lips, betrayal in their hearts. You will learn one day, great king.
Whatever democracy the Americans had in mind, it can't have been the mix of Shiite theocracy, Sunni resentment and Islamic law created by the new constitution. But if enough people repeat the word democracy, then democracy it must be.
What you got there?
Hans Blix's latest report.
Oh, yeah. What's it say?
Turns out Saddam didn't have all that stuff after all.
Told you.
Actually, Alistair, your so-called bloody dossier told me the exact opposite.
I thought that's what you wanted.
Yeah, well, now I've got to work out what to do next.
How do you mean?
Well, big market, Iraq. Always has been. Britain's always had a large share of that market. You can't just stand by while the French and Germans hoover up all the contracts.
Well, you could start by getting rid of the arms embargo.
Oh, come on, Alistair, get real.
Well, why not? You've done it for Gaddafi.
That's because he's renounced his WMD programme.
So, now we know Saddam hasn't got one. It's all mouth and no trousers. Besides, the Americans have lifted theirs.
Look, we don't always have to do what the Americans do.
You've changed your tune.
Presidents critically, and especially benefit when it comes from more than one source.
I've been looking through this dossier you sent me, the one with all the target countries.
That's called an atlas, sir.
Sure. How about Angola? What say we go after them?
No need, sir. They get bribed anyhow.
They got oil, though.
That's why they get bribed. They get the cash when we get all the oil we need.
Okay. How about Sudan?
Whoa.
It's important.
You mean the human rights thing?
I was thinking more the oil.
Oh, remember what happened in Somalia?
Sure. What happened in Somalia?
Did you never see Black Hawk Down?
Oh, yeah, sure. I fell asleep before the end. Who won?
Let's not go there.
How about North Korea?
They may have nukes, sir.
Oh, hell, where's the fun in this, Condi? For heaven's sake, what's the point of spending all these billions of dollars on defense when we can't attack anyone? I thought that was the idea. While we're the strongest nation on Earth, we use that strength to sort the world out the way we want it. I thought that was the plan.
Well, yeah, but thanks to our British friends, that's on hold right now.
Hell, Condi, we need a good war.
There's always Venezuela.
Now you're talking. What's happening in Venezuela?
You don't want to know.
Having initially sought to attack Iraq to rid the world of Islamic terrorists, Donald Rumsfeld
Stuff happens.
now acknowledges that the country has become a playground for such people, while claiming he'd sooner fight them there than in the United States. That may be so, but since the invasion, terrorists have struck in Madrid, London, Bali, Egypt and Saudi Arabia, all citing the invasion of Iraq as their cause. In America, the land of the free has become the land of the eternal vigilance, mostly by the authorities watching and listening to their ever-fearful subjects. In Iraq, tens of thousands have died in the invasion and since. Now the British are keen to leave, as are the American military. Not to be outdone, the Iraqis want to leave too. Associated Press reports that 800,000 Iraqis have left for Jordan alone. And, irony of ironies, oil-rich Iraq, awash with the stuff, is now having to import oil.
So Tony Blair returns to Downing Street, a remarkable victory. He's joined by his former spin doctor, Alistair Campbell, now MP for Burnley South.
There you go, mate. You did it.
Hey, historic third term, never been done before.
There's your place in history, right there.
Any call?
A few faxes. Berlusconi, Schroeder, all wanting to bask in your glory. Even got a call from Saddam.
Really? What did he say?
Dunno, bad line.
I thought we'd sorted out their telecom system.
No, he was on the train back from Aldershot. He's been looking at some new kit we're trying to sell him.
Anything from the White House?
Yeah, wants to know if he'll take on Venezuela with him.
Venezuela? Tell him he can wait. It's Africa this term.
But back in Iraq, there has been some good news. At least that's what the architects of the new Iraq pay for. The contract to rebuild Iraq's media, worth $38 million, went to Science Applications International, who also got the contract to run the Iraqi Reconstruction and Development Council, which was put in charge of reorganizing Iraq's ministries after the invasion. Their former vice president is Christopher Ryan Henry. Henry is now Principal Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, or Bush's number 2 in the Pentagon.
There are but three things that men respect: the lash that descends, the yoke that breaks, and the sword that slays. By the power and terror of these, you may conquer the earth.
It's a fact.
Meanwhile, on the same day as the National Strategy for Victory was published, it emerged that a Washington-based PR firm, the Lincoln Group, had been contracted by the military to translate pro-Western articles written by Americans into Arabic and then pay editors of Iraqi news organizations, both print and broadcast, to take them. The money came out of a $300 million communications and media budget, which saw 2 other companies hired to plant stories in the Iraqi press, a tactic the army defended as customary in Iraq. To add to the irony, the television station Al-Hara, meaning the free one, set up by the US government, is now being investigated for corruption.
Independent Arab news agencies didn't escape the attentions of the White House. So enraged was President Bush at the reporting of Arabic channel Al Jazeera that he had to be dissuaded from bombing their headquarters by Tony Blair. This is in marked contrast to George Bush's declaration last year.
America will not impose our own style of government on the unwilling. Our goal is to help others find their own voice, to attain their own freedom, and to make their own way.
I just want you to know how grateful we are and how grateful everyone is back home for the work you're doing here. And however tough it is, and I know it is difficult from time to time, I hope you also have some sense of how important it is. I mean, we just had the elections here in Iraq, as you know, and over 10 million people came out and voted, and really the important thing is to try and help this country become the democracy its people want it to be.
But at the end of the day, the Iraqis are free, and not without optimism. A recent poll conducted by Oxford Research International found that while just over 50% of Iraqis felt the overall situation in their country was bad, on a personal level, 70% said things were currently very good or quite good. And over 60% said things would improve in the coming year, which is a tribute to their resilience. As George Galloway might say, "We salute your courage, your strength, and your indefatigability." At the same time, the greatest concern was over security, followed by a desire for the American-led occupiers to leave. And after that, according to the opinion polls, what they want most is a single, strong leader.
Who'd have thought it? The alternative democratic solution? Me?
Two-thirds of those questioned favoured a military solution. After all, historically, Iraq has always been a tribal country, not just Sunni against Shia against Kurd. Iraq needed a strong, devious, smart leader with the army in his pocket. The trouble is, that leader was Saddam Hussein. And in common with other strong leaders, he had come to rely on extreme violence, military posturing, the threat of a huge arsenal of weapons, including chemical and nuclear, and torture. How unlike the new occupying army.
Abu Ghraib prison, for so long the symbol of Saddam's brutal regime, acquired a new reputation under the occupation, as stories emerged of the abuse of Iraqi prisoners by their American guards. Photos and accounts of degrading treatment carried out by the occupying forces quickly spread around the world, but not, it seems, as far as the Pentagon.
I've stopped reading the newspapers.
But it's not all bad news. There have been some improvements. Don't just take my word for it. Here's British Defence Secretary John Reid.
We are now dealing with a democracy in Iraq. That is not a cause for concern, it's a cause for celebration.
But to be serious for a moment, the Kurdish and Shia populations have been freed from decades of oppression. Turkey, too, a long-term oppressor of the Kurds, has seen its fortunes improve as a gateway to Iraq's oil-rich north. Not forgetting Iran, once part of the axis of evil, but now awarded in Iraq the Shiite sister state decades of war had denied it. Add to this the mobile phone companies, banned by Saddam but who since enjoyed a boom with 4 million subscribers, and Simon Fuller, whose Iraqi pop idol is the top-rated show.
I stand before you as the first leader in the Labour Party's history to win 3 full consecutive terms in office. Why? It's about a willingness to accept that when you govern, you can change your mind. When I became Prime Minister, I took a decision that our place was alongside America, and the decision to remove Saddam by force. Now, I know there are people, good people, who disagreed with me, and for a very simple reason. As a result of fighting, innocent people tragically die. How dare America use Iraq and Afghanistan to fight a war utterly alien to the future of humankind? And when you govern, you can change your mind.
So, is all hope buried between Iraq and a hard place? Or is there a way forward?
Some things change, some things stay the same. For 10 years you tried to get Iraqis to rise up against the government. Nothing doing. Now you got insurgents all over the place. You come here to get rid of terrorists? There were no terrorists. Now terrorists everywhere. Still, one thing never changes. Oil starts in Iraq, ends in California. But at least now we have 50,000 beanie babies. Well, check it out. beaniesforbaghdad.com. Thank you, America.
The one big difference between the old Iraq and the new Iraq is that Saddam Hussein's been removed from power.
Free after 2,000 years.
But there are other significant differences. While many Ba'athists have their jobs back, Most of the big ones don't, and the Ba'athist political structure is very much kaput. So where did the planners go wrong? Well, first and foremost, by not planning. According to former White House intelligence chief Richard Clarke,
part of the problem was that people didn't want the analytic process because they'd be shown up. Their assumptions would be counterfactual, and that doesn't make anyone look good. You can't fix a policy if you don't admit it's broken.
The real scandal being that we just wasted $200 billion proving it. $200 billion. Just think what else could have been achieved with money like that. One thing is for certain. Given how the situation has turned out, it's very unlikely that the Americans or the British would ever attempt anything like this again, even if they had the money or the troops left to do it. Which means that the world's despots, from Robert Mugabe to Kim Jong-il, can sleep soundly in their beds.
A flag, a constitution, and a national assembly, each one a distortion of the true meaning, names of which we only have utterance, but as to their true meaning, we remain in ignorance. He who reads the Constitution will learn that it is composed according to the mandate. He who looks at the flapping banner will find that it is billowing in the glory of aliens. He who sees our assembly will know that it is constituted by and for the interests of any but the electors. He who enters the ministries will find that they are shackled with the chains of foreign advisers.
Are we to abandon the people of Afghanistan as we rush headlong in pursuit of another enemy at the very moment when concessions are being won and the weapons inspectors are reporting that cooperation is increasing? And what of those in the West Bank and in Gaza? Is their desire for justice to be put on hold once more while a new front is opened up and a new generation of martyrs created? Let wiser counsel prevail. If we are to fight a war on terror, if we're to win the hearts and minds of a generation of Islamic believers whose own religion is being usurped by men of violence and hatred, let it be by our best example.